Hello everyone, and welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is There's Something Horrible in Rose Lake by Saint Circa. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like, and if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. As I cast my line out into the still blue waters of Rose Lake, I couldn't help but smile. There's something about a well-placed cast that never ceased to feel good. The zing of the line, the subtle arc you can gauge with the bait on the end of your hook, the tiny splash and little ripples that follow. It was a mundane accomplishment, sure, but an accomplishment is an accomplishment all the same. As I tightened the slack on my line, I observed the area around me, astonished as always by the view I had here. The sun was setting and casting gorgeous glows across the lake, where the rolling hills of southeast Ohio, deep green and endless, like something out of a postcard. I laughed absent-mindedly and pondered for a moment if postcards were even a thing anymore, or if picture messages and snaps had rendered them obsolete. As true as the nature of fishing can be, I began to follow my thoughts down whatever rabbit hole they decided to wander to. The extinction of the postcard led me to thinking about how things have changed since I was young and learned how to fish, which led me to wonder about how the world looked when my grandfather was young and learned how to fish, and his grandfather before him. Did the settlers look at this place with the same admiration? Did the Iroquois deem this a sacred place? It was in the midst of these directionless mullings that I heard it, a faint whistling sound from somewhere across the lake. If there was anything else going on, I had missed it, but with the sun setting and the wildlife around me bedding down for the night, there was nothing to drown out the sound of it. At first, I thought that maybe it was just some kind of night bird, but as I listened more intently across the pond, I couldn't make out what kind of bird could have a call like that. I had spent my whole life out in the woods around here and had never heard any sound like this. There was an emptiness to it that I couldn't describe. It was as if someone was standing across the lake and simply whistling. Not any particular tune, no particular rhythm of any kind, just something making a whistling noise for the sake of making whistling noises. Probably just some tone-deaf fisherman. I tried to reassure myself. Admittedly, the presence of this invisible stranger was putting me on a nervous edge. I'd been here for several hours now and had seen no evidence of any other person fishing here. If you wanted to fish on the other side of the lake, you had to walk a good 2 miles around it to get there. The side I had set up on was the only access a vehicle would have had to this place. I looked around me to verify that there were no other cars parked here, that perhaps I'd missed, and saw only my truck silhouette on the dirt road. As I looked behind me, with my back facing the lake, I noticed the empty whistling becoming louder and more discordant. What was faint and far away only a few moments ago had become indistinguishably closer to where I was standing. The sun by this point had fallen behind the mountains, and darkness shrouded over the lake, concealing any and everything on the other side, including the source of the whistling sound that had unmistakably gotten closer. Uncomfortable nervousness was steadily replaced with a rising fear. The sound was getting closer, and everything around me was deathly silent. No crickets or night birds, no bullfrogs croaking in high reeds, or raccoons fishing for crawdads on the banks. Just deadly silence and this whistling that drew closer and closer. At this point, something primal began to wake up in me, something that a man gets when he knows his life is in danger. Autopilot survival kicked in, and I dropped my expensive fishing gear like some sort of sacrifice and bolted towards my truck. It seemed to take ages to get to the passenger side door of the cab. With every step, I was sure whatever was coming towards me was going to grab me. I dared not look over my shoulder. The whistling sound had become loud to a point of almost chaos. Among the empty whistles were the loud plops and splashes of something moving through the water. It sounded like something was wading through the lake, but there was no way it was possible. Rose Lake is easily 100 feet in the center, and the thick mud and weeds in the shallower parts of the lake made wading through a slow task at best. But whatever this was moving fast. Way faster than anything that big should be able to. After several more panic-inducing moments, I threw the door open to the cab, hurled myself in, and slammed the door behind me as quick as I could. Through my heavy breathing, I could still hear the whistles. They were coming from right where I had been fishing just moments prior. As I went to start my truck and hurry away, my heart sank in horror and disbelief. Crap, I half whispered, half screamed as I ripped my hat off in panic frustration. My keys were in my bag. The bag I had left beside my fishing pole at the bank of the lake. Stupid, stupid, I whispered harshly at myself as I looked around for a miracle I knew I wasn't going to find. I was a simple hillbilly from rural Ohio. I wasn't going to hotwire anything, and I absolutely wasn't going to leave and try and get my keys. As I tried desperately to evaluate my situation, the whistling stopped. I couldn't hear anything. My eyes tried to adjust to the darkness. I could hear the sounds of heavy footsteps sprinting towards my truck. A mad and uncontrolled sprint. I know it sounds weird to describe, but I could almost feel the insanity in the footfalls. Whatever was barreling towards me was possessed with some kind of mindless rage. Once again, primal human instincts kicked into overdrive, and when one can't fight or flee, they hide. And that's exactly what I did. I tilted my seat back as far as it would go and slid down into the truck's cab floor as low as I could fit. No sooner had I done so when a series of loud bangs erupted violently against the truck. I could feel the whole vehicle rocking with the impacts. Heavy fists bashed furiously against the sides. Terrified beyond any rationale whatsoever, I threw my arms over my head and cried loudly, while desperately praying to whatever God could possibly bail me out of this predicament I was in. As though I was delivered, the banging finally stopped. The hyperventilation of my fear-stricken breaths was the only sound that could be heard now. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes of absolute stillness, I finally found the courage to peek my head up. It took everything I had in me to stifle the scream that tried to escape at the sight before me. Just on the other side of the passenger side window was a face pressed tightly against the window, so tightly that it seemed painful to achieve, at least to a normal person. But the thing pressed against my passenger side window was anything but normal. Large disc-like eyes peered into the darkness of the cabs like moons. No pupils, just two bright discs staring emptily into the void. Its jaw was unnaturally wide and a tooth-filled grin, 2 small holes where a nose should be, and a mess of oily black hair hung off its head in a waterlogged fashion. As the image processed, I could make out that it wasn't hair at all. The horrible thing was covered in drapes of lake weeds. Through the slight cracked driver's side window, I could smell the sticky pungent scent of rot and decay mixed grotesquely with what I could only describe as bottom of the lake smell. Unable to move, paralyzed with fear, I could only gaze into the empty eyes and smile-less grin as it remained pressed firmly against the window. As badly as I wanted to scream, to run, to weep, I could not make myself do anything. My mind raced with empty thoughts of pure fear and panic, nothing really computed or processed, as I dwindled to the point of what I was sure was a total breakdown state of insanity. The creature closed its mouth abruptly, and the whistling was back. It sounded low and far away, like it did when it was across the lake. The horrible face peeled itself off the window and was once again lost to the darkness around me. I could hear footsteps against the dirt, slow and rhythmic, making their way from me and back towards the lake. As this monster's footsteps grew further, the whistling grew louder. Still terrified to move, I listened as the whistling grew to an impossible loud volume. It was like I could hear it in my head, almost feel it in my core. It sent pains through my ears that seemed to hurt my bones. It quickly became maddening and unbearable. Then, just like that, as suddenly as the whistle had first started, there was once again complete silence. After a few moments of listening and shaking in my poor attempt at a hiding place, the natural sounds of nightlife in the woods returned to the world around me, and the evil, horrible presence of whatever predator I had narrowly escaped diminished. It was a sleepless night and a slow morning before I finally got the courage to climb out of the truck to grab my keys. I did it in a full sprint, tripping and sliding over everything in my stiff bone and exhausted state. I grabbed my bag and my bag only, and sprinted back to the truck, barely noticing the large dents and scrape marks along the side that had not been there the day prior. Jumping back into the seat, I hightailed it out of there, as far away from the lake as the wheels could take me. It wasn't until an hour or so away from Rose Lake, driving way too fast with no destination to speak of, that last night's events began to roll through my head in a more logical state. It was in the midst of these vain attempts to explain what happened that a horrible revelation came to me. The whistling got louder as it walked away. I thought to myself, almost effortfully, as if my soul was in a tug of war with my mind. But when I first heard it, when I thought it was across the lake, it had to have been really, really close. Rose Lake truly was like something out of a postcard, but now I only feel dread and nervousness when I think about it. I don't know if my father or my grandfather or his grandfather or the Iroquois would have deemed Rose Lake as scared, but for the rest of my days, I know it's cursed, and I will never go back there again.